I coined the terms in the first book of the trilogy, The Road to Somewhere. I coined the terms, the people who see the world from anywhere and the people that see the world from somewhere, the so-called anywheres and somewheres. That came out in 2017. It was an attempt to kind of understand, it was a sort of sympathetic understanding of populism in a way. I started writing it just before the Brexit vote in 2016, and I finished writing it just as Donald Trump was elected for the first time in November of that year, and it came out in early 2017. It was one of the first. It did well. I was very briefly, just for 1 week, I was in the bestseller list at number 10. So it's been it's sold a lot more than the subsequent two books. Partly because of the good timing. People were looking around for an explanation of why society seemed to have politics seemed to have gone a bit crazy with Brexit, Trump, and so on. And the basic thesis of The Road to Somewhere was that we had these new or kind of newish divides in politics, value divides in politics that had partly eclipsed the traditional socioeconomic class-based form that politics took in most Western European countries, arguments about the size of the state, market versus state, redistribution, how much support the middle and the top should give to the bottom, and so on and so forth. And those issues obviously haven't gone away completely, but they've been sort of eclipsed by more almost sort of social psychological issues relating to people's identities and sense of their country and what's happening to it, national identity, borders, immigration. Those kinds of issues rose up. And they tended to divide people along educational lines, partly. So you had these value divides. The Anywheres, the group I called the Anywheres. And by the way, I invented the labels. I didn't invent these worldview groups. They're very much there if you look at things like British social attitude surveys and so on. They are there for everybody to see. But the Anywheres, you are perhaps otherwise known as kind of the liberal graduate class. Not everybody who's a graduate is liberal, but probably a majority of people who go to university tend to go through a liberalising experience, perhaps particularly in this country, because we're international outliers in the number of people that go to residential universities. They leave their home town and their family, and they join often a whole new network of connection, friends and contacts. And anywheres tend to, partly because of that experience of mobility, anywheres tend to favour mobility and autonomy and openness. They're comfortable with social change. That's probably the key factor, because they've sort of experienced it in their own lives often. Whereas the Somewheres, who are a much larger but less influential group, I mean, Somewheres, I estimated around half the population. Anywheres about a quarter, and then there's a group I call the in-betweeners, who sort of share a mixture of the two worldviews. But the Somewheres, who tend to be less well educated and much more connected to where they come from, and their identities. There's a very useful, I think, very helpful way of thinking about this. It's actually not original to me, but a famous American sociologist called Tolka Parsons, who talks about achieved and all human beings are on a spectrum with a mix of achieved and ascribed identities. So if you're on anywhere, much of your identity is in a sense achieved, or it's easy to consider yourself a product of your own achievements in a way. You've done well at school, you've gone to a more or less good university, you have you're in a relatively high status professional job. So you tend to think of yourself as you tend to think of your identity as a kind of an achieved identity, whereas for most people still, even in a rich country like Britain, where people are reasonably well educated, their sense of themselves is more connected to those immutable things about themselves, the things that are ascribed at birth, kind of thing. So, you're a white male northern working class, and if your sense of yourself is derived more from place and group as it is from somewheres, then you're clearly going to find social change much more uncomfortable. And I think that is quite a helpful way of looking at the reason why some people felt very drawn to the Brexit protest vote, because both of these worldviews are perfectly decent worldviews. The problem has been in our politics probably since the mid 1990s is that one of those groups, the Anywheres, have been far too dominant. Both political parties, all of politics is dominated by Anywheres. The culture is dominated by Anywheres. The business, everything tends to be dominated by Anywheres, and Anywheres tend to assume that everybody is like them. But that ain't the case.